Okay. Welcome everybody to the live show for the Palestine Reading Challenge. Thank you so much to Sully and Nicole for joining me in this challenge. And everyone out there who also read along, whether you're watching this live or watching it later. If you are watching live, definitely say hello and drop any comments or questions that you have in the chat about what you read. So just starting off, which of the challenges did y'all complete? What did you read? Just kind of like tell us about it.
Sure. I'll just jump into it. I guess I tried to complete, I think, all of the reading challenges that were set, albeit I kind of used books to cover more than one of the challenges at points. So which was great. Like, there were a couple of books that I read that I totally wouldn't have read, or sort of the kind of genres I wouldn't have read otherwise. So I really am glad that there were a wide variety of things to kind of cover. And then some of the side challenges. I tried to listen to some Palestinian music. Music isn't really my thing, so I don't ever really know where to start with that. But I listened to mostly hip-hop artists because of anything that's kind of what I lean towards. I didn't make any food because I'm not really the best cook. But I bought and tried some. So hopefully that covers that for me. And then I guess a slightly more serious one. Although I don't know anyone or don't have any friends that kind of have different views on Palestine and the situation to me, I had friends who weren't too sure and didn't really understand what was going on, and I was having conversations with them and talking to them and giving them resources and stuff, which was really great, and it was a good way of connecting with my friends in a different way.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I didn't make any food either because I'm terrible at cooking, and I unfortunately haven't gone anywhere either. I looked it up, and I'm not really sure if there's like a Palestinian restaurant anywhere nearby where I live, but I definitely want to try to look into it if I ever, go somewhere else where there's like way more options and stuff. And I didn't do every single one of the reading challenges, I think, but I did multiple of them, and the books were really great. So I'm sure we're going to get to the books later. And when it comes to talking to people, I feel like I'm thankfully in my bubble. There's no one who would like be, terrible about it or anything. I did try to like mention some of the if I knew that something supported Israel or something, or like a company or whatever, then I mentioned it or brought it up to when we talked about something. So yeah, and other than that, I feel like it was just mostly on Twitter that I tried to like share information and stuff. So yeah, that's kind of the overall thing.
I can't believe that I actually read all the books I set out to read because I'm like a super slow reader. So I was able to read all the books that I mentioned in my like overview video, which I think ticks all the reading boxes. And then just earlier this week, we got takeout from a Palestinian restaurant here in Houston called Hala, if anyone from Houston is watching this, which is amazing. It was so good. I couldn't believe it was like one of the best meals I've ever had in Houston. Houston has really good food because we just have like a really diverse city and everything grows around here. So like all our produce is really fresh and stuff. So we're a really good food city, and this was like really, really, really good food. So I'm super psyched to have found a new awesome restaurant. The one challenge I didn't do was watching a film. I just sort of forgot about it. And then I was looking back. I was looking back earlier today at the challenges. I was like, oh crap, I forgot that one. I did watch a lot of music videos by Dom, which was the hip hop Palestinian group that I got into. Yeah. I've been listening to their music a lot. I actually find it's really good to listen to when I'm writing because I don't understand it, so I can write to it, which is cool about international music. And then, yeah, for me, definitely had some difficult conversations. This was going to be a question later on, but like, yeah, I can go into it. Like, I was involved with some other Jewish activist friends in an anti-racist Jewish group that was like forming in Houston. And we had been, this had formed starting back in like February. And when all this kind of happened in April and May, we started writing to the group and saying like, this group has to take a stand against Zionism. And this has to be like, we have to support a free Palestine. Or you can't say you're doing anti-racist work as a Jewish group and not confront the racism, you know, being enacted in our name in Israel and all this stuff. So we tried to have those conversations and we ended up being told like to shut up or leave the group. So we left. We were like, this is a sham and we can't like participate in this. And then we established with like 5 of us that left the group sort of at the same time. We established Houston's first Jewish Voice for Peace chapter, which is like an international Jewish organization that supports Palestinian liberation. And Houston has never had a chapter before. So now we have a chapter. It's like the 5 of us, but we're hoping to grow. So we had our meeting where we had a quorum. I think like you had to have at least 4 members and we had 5. So we reached a quorum. That was cool. So let's get into talking about the books. What books did y'all read and how were they? Just like tell us about them.
Yeah, so I don't have any of them physically because I mainly read ebooks and audiobooks, but I can find them on my phone to just, you know, show the cover because I feel like that's always, it's nice to see covers.
Yeah, I remember it.
So I read a few poetry collections. I just was really feeling like reading poetry, and so
nice to see covers. Yeah. Sorry,
the sound was weird for a second.
A weird echo or something.
Yeah. So I read 2 poetry collections by Fadi Yuda. I hope I'm saying the name right. And the one that I liked more was Tethered to Stars. It looks like this. You can't really see it because it's a really dark cover, but so that was one of them. And the other one is called Footnotes in the Order of Disappearance. So that one looks like that. Yeah, it was really nice and just, I don't know. I never know how to talk about poetry. But it was quite abstract, which isn't always my thing, but I felt like there were some really like powerful and impactful poems. But the collection I liked even more, that it was absolutely amazing, was Water and Salt, which looks like this. And this one was just really powerful and touching, and just, I don't know, I completely like absorbed every word, and I basically read it in one sitting, so that was amazing. And there are a few other books, but so I don't keep talking, maybe you want to mention some.
We could talk about all the poetry you read. I can talk about the poetry I read. So I read Mahmoud Darwish's Mural, and he is like an extremely celebrated Palestinian poet. I don't often read poetry, so I also feel like it's like hard for me to talk about it, and I feel like I maybe picked the wrong book because this was like one of his last books, and it was really at the end of his life, and I feel like it was referencing a lot of stuff. It was also the first of the 4 books that I read. I feel like it was referencing a lot of stuff that I didn't understand, that maybe after reading these like other 4 books, if I read it again, I would like get a lot more of the context and references and stuff. But there were some really, really powerful quotes. I might flip through and pull up some of them. Yeah, Sully, you can tell it. Hold on, my daughter's trying to get in here.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I also read Mahmoud Darwish poetry collection. I read In the Presence of Absence, which is one of his more celebrated collections. I think, like Sim, I don't really read poetry. I don't really like poetry's not really my thing to read. I don't really get it very easily. But I think I liked In the Presence of Absence because it was poetry, but it also felt a little bit like prose. So it made it a little bit easier for me to read. But still, although I would recommend reading it, I personally struggled purely because poetry isn't really a thing I kind of get. So, but no, I definitely recommend it.
I found the part this just like really struck me, and it was a theme, something that I ended up thinking about this line a lot throughout then all the other books I read. This is like a long epic poem about Mahmoud Darwish like confronting death because it was at the end of his life and like thinking about mortality and all this stuff. But at one point he's sort of imagining himself speaking to his jailer. And one thing he says is, I said, "How long have you been surveying me and imprisoning yourself?" And that line just like really stuck with me throughout everything, was just how much the more like reading about all these historical things and the more Israel cracks down on Palestine, the more they're imprisoning themselves, and how that plays out across all these like different books that I read. So yeah, but I wish I was better at reading poetry. Because I feel like it was really beautiful, but I didn't understand a lot of it.
Yeah. Likewise.
Yeah,
I feel like that's maybe partially why I preferred Water and Salt, because I feel like that was way more just like straightforward and clear, because I also struggle with the like kind of more abstract, complex poetry. I feel like you really have to like take your time and just have the brain for it. So what novels did you guys read?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So I don't think I got around to reading a novel, but I read a collection of short stories.
Oh, cool.
It was called Jokes for the Gunman by, I apologize, I think I'm going to butcher this name, by Mazen Marauf. He's a Palestinian diaspora author from, I believe Iceland. I would say about half of the short stories in this collection I felt were really strong. The other ones I don't think simply just didn't appeal to me. I think some of the short stories, it was very clear the message that was trying to be put across, and it was a powerful message about being Palestinian and the Palestinian experience. And some of the other ones were sort of straying into other topics about just life and sexuality, etc. Which, and some of them were very, I would describe them as like artistic pieces, as in it felt like he was just trying to make something to stand out, as opposed to telling a convincing story in a short story, which is difficult because it's a short story. But again, the book was longlisted for the International Man Booker, so I think it is a good read. But I personally felt about half of the short stories were stronger and carried me reading the entire thing.
Yeah, I feel like that's usually the case with anthologies. You know, some short stories resonate and some don't. So the novel that I read was Against the Loveless World by Susan Abulhawa, and I listened to the audiobook, which she actually narrates herself. So I feel like that's always super cool when, you know, it's the author, and it just makes it even more impactful. And this one is an adult historical fiction book, and it's definitely really like hard-hitting and difficult to read about at times, because it's about this young Palestinian woman who is in prison, and she is kind of like is narrated in flashbacks to her life prior to going to prison. And I I really loved this book. It was just really powerful, and I loved how, while it's, it deals with really painful, difficult things, there's a lot of hope in it as well, and there's like friendships and a little bit of like a love story, and it's just a really beautiful book that I really recommend.
That sounds awesome. I'm going to add that to my list. I read, the first novel I read was Salt Houses by Hala Alian. And I super, super recommend this. This was a 5-star read for me. I think it's really great in terms of like internalizing the history of Palestine as well, because it's a multi-generational family story. And it, starting with the generation that experienced the Nakba, and then the 1967 war, and then the exile. It goes forward in time to they're exiled in Kuwait, and it's Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait, and then and then all the way into the present, and like this Palestinian family is like scattered kind of all over the world because of everything that's happened, and it's just like is a beautiful family story. It's like intensely personal and like these tiny, close, intimate moments that feel so human and real, but it's also carrying the weight of like all this history. And it was just incredibly moving. I cried like 10 times reading it. Like, it's just a really beautiful novel. So I definitely recommend it. Like, it reminded me of books like Pachinko, if you've read that, which is like a multi-generational Korean story, very like personal and familial, but also like a ton of history involved. I love those kinds of books. So like I love this one. And the other novel I read was You Exist Too Much by Zayna Arafat, which is, I was really interested in this because she's a bisexual author, and it's I think it's a memoir, but like kind of a fictionalized memoir that deals with like coming out as a Palestinian American woman. The Palestinian cultural aspect is like there, but kind of more minimal. It's really more of just like a contemporary American novel about addiction, love addiction, sex addiction, and like coming out as queer to a family that is not super supportive of that. But it was interesting to read that too. And I think these stories are really important too, that like Palestinian authors should not be just like relegated to only talking about the Nakba or whatever. But like just telling their stories, like, how they're living their lives. So I was glad I had like that perspective as well.
Yeah, I haven't gotten around to this one, but I got it and I'm really excited to read it because it sounds really good. So.
Oh, you got this one too?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Awesome. And then what about nonfiction? Did y'all read any nonfiction or other genres I haven't mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think going into this challenge as well, I was sort of going through a kick of wanting to read a lot of nonfiction. So I think that's kind of where I lean towards for this. The two I read were, I've got one here. It was Raja Shahada's Where the Line is Drawn, Crossing Boundaries into Occupied Palestine. It kind of did read like a novel, but kind of like it was the story of his life in Palestine. He's a human rights lawyer. His dad was one of the biggest proponents of the two-state solution in the 60s. And it's just kind of his experience in Palestine and his relationship with Israel. As an academic, he goes there to work and study, and his relationship with Israeli friends, with his experience with the police and the military and politicians, and even his like lawyer contemporaries in Israel. It was so interesting, and it was a very different experience reading, because a lot of the stuff I've read on Palestine and the conflict has always been very theoretical and discussing the politics and stuff of it, but this was more just seeing what the experience was like for someone, obviously very much from a person who is middle to upper class, but still that experience, it was really eye-opening. And I think this one in particular, I cried a few times just because of he really got across the pain he felt and the conflict he also felt in friendships and relationships, and kind of how he matured over the years, because it talks about sort of the Nakba, the Intifadas, and the wars, and the sort of the socio and political aspects of them as well. So I think of all the books I read, I think that's the one I would recommend the most, because it's the most different.
An incredible author. I also read one of his books for my nonfiction.
I really wanted to read that one as well. That was my other choice by him.
I finished it like 10 minutes before this started. I was like, rushing. It's so good. Oh my gosh. I'll talk about it in a minute. I didn't want to cut you off, but like,
no, of course.
Amazing author.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And the other one I read was on Palestine. It's sort of a conversational piece between Noam Chomsky and Ilan Pappé. Again, I think those two are amazing academics, and it's interesting to see them speaking and having their slightly different perspectives on what's going on and sort of the way they see it, and also having their wealth of knowledge is very eye-opening. I think that's the thing where I learnt the most from. And yeah, I think much like yourself, I kind of finished reading that about 10 to 15 minutes before we went live as well.
Yeah, I unfortunately struggle with nonfiction a lot, so I haven't managed to read one yet. But both of the books that you mentioned sound really good, so I definitely want to get to them when I can. And I did read another book, but I feel like we should get to that after Semi want to talk about.
Yeah, I can talk about this one. So this is Palestinian Walks. It's also by Raja Shahada, and it's about 6 different times he took walks in the hills outside Ramallah, where he lives. By walks, he means it's like hikes, what we call like hikes in the US. And he has so much love for the land and for the environment. And that's why I chose this book, because I'm a climate fiction, eco-fiction writer, like this intersection of like ecological devastation and Western imperialism, like playing out in Palestine. I was like really interested in that idea. And I put off reading it to the end because I thought it was just going to devastate me. I mean, it sounds so depressing because it's like over the course of his lifetime, he has seen the landscape that he loved so much growing up as a child in Ramallah just destroyed and marred by these settlements and roads that Israel has built everywhere. But his writing is so beautiful that it was actually like I read it very quickly, and it was very engaging and moving. It goes into like all of the ways that Israel used law and courts as this sort of veneer to cover over the crime of them illegally seizing Palestinians' lands and covering it with settlements and doing all this ecological devastation in the meantime, but then claiming that these lands they were seizing were for nature reserves and stuff. But Palestinians aren't allowed to go into the nature reserves, which are, he now to take hikes, he's committing a crime because all of the natural wilds left in Palestine are banned. They're Palestinians are not allowed to go there. So he has to illegally go hiking now. And more there's settlers, with guns and the danger of being shot and being arrested just for trying to enjoy the nature out there. So it is like incredibly depressing in some ways, but like the way he writes about the landscape of Palestine is so beautiful and moving. And you learn so much about like the culture of like the small villages and the lifestyle that they had there that was, pretty consistent for thousands of years. And this really is a case of like indigenous displacement and like, and one of the things that there's a chapter towards the end, the second to last chapter is how did you get over it? And it's like one of his friends asking him like, how did you get over your anger? And he actually says that it was writing that was like writing out like the poison was the most important thing for him. And the way that he found he was actually he felt most useful, even because all of the sort of legal trials he went through as a lawyer all kind of came for naught because Israel just does whatever it wants to, disregarding the law. So I thought that was really powerful. I'm really kind of sitting with that. And being a writer and someone who, not to the extent that he has seen his land devastated. I live in Houston and the ecology here was devastated long before I ever moved here. So I haven't had to watch like a land that I loved get destroyed like that. It was already done before I got here and it's ongoing. But it was really powerful to me that like the amount of stock he puts in his writing is like a really powerful form of both like ecological and human rights activism. And that he also thinks about like deep time, and like the long history of the world and finds some peace and comfort in that. And like these Israeli, settlement townhomes that they are building are not going to stand forever, but the hills will, Yeah. So, that I don't know. I found all that. It's like very depressing, but like, I don't know, still read it. It's not as depressing as you think it's going to be. And it's a really beautiful book. So that's my plug for Palestinian Walks.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds amazing.
I definitely want to read that now.
Yeah. After I finished it, he's such a good writer. I went on to Goodreads and like I added all of his books to want to read.
Yeah.
He has Strangers in the House is his like, I think it's his book about his parents' experience living through the Nakba of 48. So I definitely want to read that one. And he had one that came out in 2019. So I'm really curious to read that because it's so recent. And this was 2007. So were there any other books that y'all read that we haven't talked about yet? Or does that cover it?
Yeah, I read the children's picture book that you had on your TBR, and I can't remember the name.
Oh, Baba, what is my name?
Yes. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if it's like weird to read it as an adult just for myself, but I read it and I really liked it actually a lot. When I don't read children's books often or middle grade, but I just am constantly in awe of how well the authors manage to write about like difficult topics, because I feel like it like tells the truth of like, any bad things that happen, but it just does it in such a thoughtful, hopeful way that is really, like it's so that the kids can handle it, and it just does it so well. And I just thought it was really beautiful and I loved the illustrations as well. And it was just a really good book. And even as an adult, I felt like it was a great book.
Yeah, I also have really enjoyed it. My daughter, I've tried to read it to her a couple times. So she's only 4 and it's a little too, it's just a little too, I think it's like more for like probably like 6 or 7, 8-year-olds. I think when she's that age, she'll like get it more. But yeah, I love it. Some of the things that I found like most powerful is like right at the beginning, he gives his daughter the keys, like, and that's such a thing of, a lot of Palestinians living in the Palestinian diaspora, like still carry the keys to the homes that they were kicked out of during the Nakba. And then it's mostly like a celebration of Palestinian culture and Palestinian cities, and kind of takes you on a tour of like important important places in Palestine and foods and stuff like that. But then at the end, it does go into like, we were dispossessed. Why are we refugees? But yeah, So that's the last question is what made me a refugee, and her dad is like, that's a story for another time. So it like acknowledges the refugee status, but it's like, yeah, it's not going into all the horrors of everything that has happened. So good for like age appropriate young kids. Yeah, really enjoy it as well.
Great. I also read read Palestine by Joe Sacco. So his it's just the sort of the collection of all of his sort of Palestine comics that came out, I believe in the early 90s / late 80s.
Yeah, I think the 90s.
Yeah. So I mean I love graphic novels / comics. The art was I love the art because it had this almost uncanny valley feeling to all of the drawings of people, not in a bad way, but like it was very unique, so it stuck out to me, very much so. And some of the stories, they weren't even stories, they were people's lives almost that he was talking about, and the feelings of everyone on both sides was just I don't know, it was so moving and so much like Where the Line is Drawn, to get that kind of more personal feeling as to the people who are actually there, the Palestinians and even the Israelis as well. It's just a completely different dimension that we don't really have, being people not being there. It was great. And I think one chapter in particular, or one book in particular, stuck out to me. I think it was book 3, where it was it went a little bit more into the history of the Nakba and the First Intifada and the 67 war. So it was also very informative at the same time, which is great. And I mean, if you love graphic novels as well, 100% recommend picking it up.
So that book, it was like the beginning of my awakening on Palestine.
Oh.
I got it in a used bookstore, and I was just like in the graphic novel section, like looking for something. Because I also love comics and graphic novels. And so I just bought it. And having been raised Jewish, I was raised Jewish by like a liberal family, secular Jewish. So we were not Zionists or anything, but I definitely was told the line of like, it's very complicated. Mm-hmm. Both sides hate each other, and it's very complicated and it's fucked. So just like, don't worry about it, And I also was raised that like, we don't talk about Israel in front of certain relatives, because just don't talk about Israel ever at like Passover or whatever. And so I was reading it, and why I recommend that book so much to people who have like never read anything about Palestine, even though it's not by a Palestinian author, is because like he goes into it as an American journalist, like he also thinking like, oh, it's both sides. Oh, they both hate each other. And you go along with him as he's in Israel and Palestine, and like seeing like, wait, no, it's not both sides. This is clearly skewed on one side. And so I think it's a really helpful book for people who like need to go on that journey themselves. Mm-hmm. It certainly was for me, to just kind of see the situation clearly for the first time and go, oh wait, like everything I've been told is not correct. Yeah. There's something really wrong here. Yeah. Does that cover everything that we've read?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
I'm proud of us. We read a lot of
books.
There's a couple of people watching. If anyone in the chat has stuff that they read and that we didn't mention, please tell us about it. We would love to post up your comments.
Yeah, definitely, please.
Yeah. So Yeah, okay, this is a hard question, right? But like obviously we learned a lot of things from reading all these books. But like if you could kind of distill it down, what were like some of the most important things you learned or are gonna like take away from this experience?
I mean, for me, I think personally, and also just outside of reading these books, it's something I've learned over the past couple of months, which is great. It's however much we discuss about it and however much we kind of give our opinions, the people whose opinions and feelings and just the people we have to consider the most when we're taking any action in relation to this, whether it be activism or promote it or talking to people about Palestine, it's always considering the Palestinians themselves first and make sure what you're doing isn't going to inadvertently harm them just to make it come across as you're doing activism or because it, for lack of a better term, makes you feel good about doing or you perceive you're doing something good, but you're not really considering the ramifications for others. I think that's something that came across in quite a few of the things I read. And I think for me, that's the biggest learning I've taken from this.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is extremely important. And I don't know. I feel like I have learned a lot, and it's kind of hard to like put it in one, thing. But I feel like one thing that is really important with this and any other movement, I feel like, is that it always just kind of like, explodes when that like one or multiple horrible things happen and then everyone is talking about it. And I feel like what is important is to just kind of like, it's great that, like when that happens, a lot of people like spread resources and we learn about a lot of books at one time. Mm-hmm. And so I think that what is important is just to take it with us. And instead of like trying to, read a million books when this happens and then like never read any books by Palestinians again, I think is just super important to like keep the books that we found in mind and just read them in the next, few years and like forever or, and so I think that is the most important.
Definitely.
Yeah, that was one of the things I thought of was like, having read all these stories, it's like getting a lot of fuel to make sure that I'm going to stick with it for the long haul, because I know that's why I'm almost sort of glad that this live show ended up being postponed, because we are now definitely talking about this when the eye of the world has moved on from the intense focus that there was in May. And we need to be in this struggle, for the long haul. And having formed a Houston Jewish Voice for Peace chapter, it's like that I've made a commitment now to like long-term activism on this cause. So reading these books really like connecting, especially through the novels, like connecting with family histories and characters on like a very personal level, and the Raja Shahada book. It's like, man, like I like learning about like so many different types of suffering, but it's like, I'm going to remember this and it's going to fuel me to continue to care about this issue and to continue like keeping, the spotlight on it. So that was one of the biggest things. And then another thing that I was just thinking about a lot is seeing so many parallels between what's going on in Palestine and in different ways, but similar ways that we know these ties exist, like what happens in the US and like the policing of Palestinian people versus, policing against Black and brown people in the US and like the environmental racism that you see in both groups. And like, we know that US police learn from Israeli military. And we know that like Israel took its settler colonialist project, like the ideas from how the US expanded against Indigenous Americans. I'm not trying to say those groups are like equal or the same, but what it really like brought home to me was like, I don't know, Israel and Palestine, it is like a really, it's almost like the crux of global imperialism,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it is, and it's, as a USian, right, it's our problem. Like, this is very much funded by, and the UK,
Yeah, definitely.
very much funded by our taxpayer dollars. Like, this is very much being done with our wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you know, fucked up. So
no, yeah, I mean, definitely, especially over this period, and I think even before, just learning how much the UK, and again, yeah, my taxpayer, the money I pay for my taxes, where I'm like, I want this to go towards my NHS or to making better schools or maybe fix the roads. It's not going to that. It's going to funding these things, and the UK does a job of always kind of being like, no, we're just there. They come across as far less involved than like the US, but they are very much involved. And every time, so you can write to your local MP, and you'll always get the same response across the board. It's this very cookie cutter. Yeah, what's going on isn't great, guys. We don't like it. We think it should be as it was decided in '67. It sucks, guys. And that's kind of as much as they do, as much as they say. Obviously, there are outliers with very outspoken politicians, but it's very much a status quo here. And I think from a UK perspective, it is very much down to the people having to really almost force this upon our representatives. Kind of, yeah, we are just as complicit as the US.
Yeah. I mean, the U.S. I don't know. Yeah.
Well,
because y'all were there in the beginning.
Yeah.
Y'all sold the land, like.
Yeah.
But we have been in recent years. I think we've been far more money in military aid. So it's like, who's worse? Like,
yeah.
It's both really shitty. And the U.S. has just been like blank check whatever Israel wants to do. And any criticism of Israeli policies, it's just like, you're an anti-Semite, you know. And of course, like, I have been called like a self-hating Jew, and you know, disowned by some really close family friends and stuff over this, because I don't know. Yeah, people buy the propaganda just wholeheartedly. You can't say anything bad about Israel in the U.S. But that, I think that did start changing in May, and so. Definitely, yeah. I think definitely I'd never seen so much solidarity with Palestine, even though it still felt like, wow, we're really exposed out here doing this, you know? To the extent that even like I'm on sub with a book and I was like, am I going to like not get published?
Yeah.
Because I came out as like really pro-Palestinian on Twitter, you know, but I've never been one to like be able to shut up when I'm supposed to. So how do you think, so I was really, did y'all see, was it Tahora Hashmi, who, I think so, who has the book club now? Man, I had retweeted her video. No, it wasn't her. Who was it? I can't remember who it was. Okay, but there was a Palestinian author who tweeted, she did like a longer Instagram story that I had shared. It was Haneen Norikat. That's who it was. Haneen Norikat did, she's like a YA author, and she's been trying to get a novel sold for years. And she's been told that like being Palestinian is like difficult to get published as a Palestinian author. Like, she'd have better chances of selling her book if she just claimed an Arabic identity rather than a Palestinian identity. And I don't know, do you guys have any ideas how in the book community or in Booktube or on Book Twitter, like we can, I don't know, just sort of help make it more inclusive for Palestinian authors, or I don't know, any like thoughts on that?
Definitely. I mean, I think it's something I also saw. I love consuming books as audiobooks, and I really tried to find some of the books I was reading as audiobooks, but I didn't think I could find any of them. And it kind of goes to show certain topics aren't going to be produced. And I feel like it, that's how I think about most things. It takes convincing one of the bigger players to kind of take that step and, you know, be willing to engage with Palestinian authors. I mean, obviously people like Penguin will publish things by the big intellectuals, but they kind of shy away from Palestinian or some other minority authors. It's kind of finding a way to convince these big companies to sort of do so. And I think one easy way is just to continue any books by Palestinian authors or any other group that you want to support. Go out and buy their self-published books or their books they've published with smaller presses, because the more you do that, the more these bigger companies will be willing to be like, okay, for them, they're going to make some money off it. That's kind of their main incentive. And I guess it's almost convincing them they might make some money off this, which I guess personally isn't my favorite way of convincing people, but that's one way I think to go about it.
I think that, and they have to be convinced that the PR of doing it is worth the blowback from the ADL or whatever. It's going to be like, you published a Palestinian book, you're anti-Semites. And I think for that, I do think what we're doing here is helpful in terms of that. It's just making reading Palestinian books this is something we want to do, and I'm just being outspoken about it. We had a comment from Luke. So far from my list, I've read The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pappé. That's the book that Tahura Hashmi is doing. She's doing an ongoing Palestinian reading book club that's going to, continue throughout the year, and that was her first pick for that. And The 100 Years' War on Palestine by Rasheed Khalidi. Both were super informative, heartbreaking, and infuriating. So I definitely saw both of those in my research, and they're on my list for nonfiction picks. And Luke said, I really recommend them. The second one was a bit harder to get through, but a really sweeping historical journey.
Definitely. I've not read the first one, but I remember reading The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, I believe, for a quote-unquote paper I wrote in school. And I guess maybe at a young age, I didn't fully understand everything because I was about 16 or 17. But I think if I were to reread it now, it would be even more it would be even more hard-hitting.
Wait, they taught you that in school?
No, they didn't. Oh. Basically, in some schools in the UK, you can sort of, in your final year of school, and your last 2 years of school, you can opt in to do this additional thing where you it's like a practice in writing a university paper, and they let you choose the topic you want to write on. And I don't remember for what reason I decided to write it on the Israel-Palestine question, is how the school was like, this is how you should frame it. And I think that was kind of my introduction to this entire conflict question. But yeah, it definitely wasn't something that was taught to me in school. And I feel like a couple of my teachers were a little bit like, are you sure you want to do this? And I was like, yes, sir, I want to.
That's awesome. Wow. Yeah. That's really cool. Yeah, definitely. It was never mentioned in my schooling at all. Yeah.
Yeah, to the support that we were talking about before, I feel like, to what I already kind of mentioned, I think that it's important to just include books by Palestinian authors in just our general reading, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. If we're doing a list of historical fiction books or just general fiction or poetry or whatever it is, to just include them in there almost casually, if that makes sense. Just incorporate them in all our reading and just uplift their voices. Obviously, if we see a book by a Palestinian on social media or any pitches to agents or whatever, to just try to boost that and just to follow Palestinian creators and writers and everyone, and support them like at all times. I think that like these are the like easiest and just things that will do a lot, I think, in the long run.
Yeah, for sure. Luke also mentioned Angela Davis's Freedom is a Constant Struggle. And that book really goes into the ties between racist policing in the US and what's going on in Israel. And yeah, I've read that. It's fantastic, fantastic book. Yeah, what was I just going to say about the book inclusion? I can't remember. But yeah, definitely Nicole to all those points.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. We have 10 minutes left? Any sort of final thoughts or anything we didn't talk about that you wanted to discuss?
I mean, I think a point more so from my going about this challenge, I do, on reflection, wish I'd read more things from authors that weren't necessarily, although I'm not 100% sure, but straight men. I feel like that's kind of the only perspective I got when I was reading. And I think some way into the challenge, I was like, I really wish I'd gone for either an author from a different sexuality or a female author or just something different. I feel like maybe I would have liked a wider range of reading, I think, personally. But I think that was more a thing of my selection, which some of the suggestions you both have given, I'm going to check out and read.
Cool.
Do we want to maybe like talk about the other things that we can do to support Palestine outside of reading?
Yeah.
Or something?
Great. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like one of the ways that I saw Palestinians mention like that we can help the most is boycotting.
Yes.
Like companies and everything that support Israel and things like that. So I think that like that is something that I want to constantly try to check. And, if I figure out that like one company that I like, use their products or whatever, that like they are in support of Israel or anything, that just, I'm going to stop buying from them or things like that. I think that like that is one of the, maybe it's not always possible, but when possible, I think that's definitely important to do as well.
Yeah, we incorporated the Jewish Voice for Peace chapter, and one of their things is like, to be a member, you have to commit to doing BDS. And so I was really honestly like during the meeting, like, okay, here's my thing that I've always wondered about BDS, which is like, to me, I was worried about like, here I am in the US, which is also a violent, imperial, racist state. Who are we to like sit in judgment of Israel and like boycott them? It was something that always bothered me about it that I just didn't understand. And luckily someone in the group was like much more knowledgeable about it and really gave me a great answer, which I will try to do my best to repeat, which was basically like, first of all, a good thing to know is this was not just like a protest movement that was like thought up by like Americans. This is, people from Palestine, boots on the ground, who like are the most familiar with the situation, are saying this is the way that the international community can most help. So we need to like trust their leadership and expertise. And BDS isn't just like boycott absolutely anything that ever passes through Israel. They have like a very targeted list of companies that are like particularly violent and particularly important to like the Israeli economy and stuff, where they really think it can be a key lever. And we know that it worked in South Africa to end apartheid there. Yeah. So this isn't about like, you can, as a USian or a UKian, we can understand our complicity in the situation in Israel and in the violence in Israel, and participating in BDS doesn't mean you're saying like, we're above that or we're better than that, so we're not going to buy from them. It's like, this is how the Palestinian activists on the ground are asking us to support them. So like, definitely, yes, we should support BDS.
Yeah. No, I entirely agree.
That was the thing I was gonna say that I like totally forgot earlier. Thank you, Nicole, for bringing it up. Yeah. How other ways that we can support Palestine? I mean, yeah, other thoughts?
I mean, I think another way, I guess, is especially those also have platforms, using those to just not just retell what Palestinians have said, but to give them a wider platform. I think it's a great way of doing that, because it's just better to hear it from the people involved, and also to find a way to help support Palestinian sort of platforms and people. There's a museum in the US, I think it's in Washington, the Museum of the Palestinian People. I have a friend who I think he volunteers/works there, and I always do my best to try and, obviously being in the UK, it's different. I can't support them directly or tell people to go there because, well, you know, I'm not going to tell someone to fly to the US, but always trying to sort of, if I can, donate to them, or if they're doing any sort of online talks or pieces, always trying to share them within either my bubble or to try and get it to a wider audience is always a great thing to do. And I guess if you can, it's almost an easy way of helping.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry.
I was gonna say, yeah, and just like also not like, I do think, like you said, that using your platform and the social media stuff like is really important, and continuing to follow Palestinian accounts, like particularly on Twitter and Instagram, and when they're trying to get a hashtag going, retweeting that. There was, again, like a lot more of that solidarity was happening back in May, and it's really kind of tapered off. And I found like my feed was like full of Palestinian stories in May, and now I kind of have to go looking for them to find out what's going on. And so continuing to look for them and make sure that we're amplifying those voices.
Definitely.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say exactly that, basically, just that it's important to keep supporting them. And I feel like now, unfortunately, it kind of like we have to look for it more actively, because before I feel like I would just run into a new hashtag or just new tweets all the time, like on the timeline. But it's important to just, keep checking the profiles of the Palestinians if it doesn't turn up on our timeline on Twitter, and just like keep boosting their voices and keep learning about what's happening, because like it hasn't stopped, and also maybe just trying to remind others as well to just keep doing that too, so that, it can be as wide as possible.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much. Any final thoughts you want to share before we close out?
I mean, from me personally, I want to thank you both for reaching out to me to participate in this. I very much appreciate it, and not just getting to converse with the both of you, but really actively pushing me to go out and read more about Palestine. So, I mean, I can't say more thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it so much.
Thanks right back to both of you for joining this challenge. It's been really good to know. It's kept me honest about like keep reading, because I knew we were gonna have this live show coming up. Like we gotta get these books read. And I had a great time talking with both of you today.
Great.
Yeah, thank you from me as well. It was definitely like a nice way to push us all into, exactly like you say, reading more. And it was definitely, I feel like once you start reading the books, it's like you don't really want to stop, it definitely helped push me for the future as well, to just keep reading and doing everything else.
Yeah. And thank you to the people that participated in the chat. Thank you, Eric and Luke and everybody who's been watching, and everyone who will watch this in the future, hopefully.
Yeah.
In the US this Friday afternoon, not everybody can watch. Thank you for the recommendation here, Alice in Wonderland. to listen to the Walat group. Yeah. And this was a great challenge. I think we're all committed to like continuing reading Palestinian literature. It doesn't end here. So we'll continue to do that and talk about it. And thanks everybody for watching.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.